Jen, here's something fun.
I'm excited.
Right now, everybody's going to get to hear me have a chat with Amanda Littman from Run for Something. Because listen, everybody, we know we are hearing you, and we knew that we were being very quiet. And listen, we all need to get there on our own.
Hold space for our despair. We are holding space, Sarah.
For the record, I've been loud from the very beginning. But here we are, and it's however many months, too many months, and we're ready. We're ready to start talking and start thinking about what we can do. And one of the things that I kept coming back to is brilliant Amanda Littman and amazing Run for Something, who some of you have heard speak because she spoke at Fated Mates 2 years ago in New York City.
Yes.
She got up and she said to all of you, like, it's time to get activated. We want you to run for something. And here's the thing she said, and you're about to hear it. So but I am going to underline it before you start, which is there are hundreds of thousands of offices that are every year up for election across the United States. Tiny jobs in small towns like town clerk. Every summer I go to this place in Rhode Island, and the town clerk also is the hot dog seller at the beach. So these are part-time jobs in some ways, but people who want to really give back to their communities. And then larger jobs like mayor of New York City, but you should not run for that because we have too many of those right now. But what you can do is run for school board or library board or city council or town council or whatever other things you can run for, right? In your town. And what's wild about this is so few people actually do stand up and do this. So it ends up being the same 5 people forever in town. And what you will hear Amanda say, and I just want to say it out loud again, is to win a school board election in some small towns in the United States, it costs $1,000. And if you think that you are out there, you listen to me, you, the person who is listening right now,
commuting, walking your dog,
wherever you are, you are smart, you are savvy, you are a magnificent firebird, and you can be on the school board because look at these idiots.
The rage is back.
And so here's what I'm saying. If you will promise us that you will never ban a book, we promise you we will help you build your war chest of $1,000.
You're about to hear Amanda Littman, and I'm really excited about it. I could not make for this part of the conversation.
It's not a very long interview, but it's an important one. And as you're listening, think, am I going to run for something? Or who do I know?
Who do I know? Exactly.
Who would run for something? Because remember, women need to hear it 7 times. Men, they don't need to hear it at all and they want to run.
So I want you to listen. We want you to hear this. It's about 15 minutes, and then we will be back with our regularly scheduled programming.
Welcome, Amanda Littman from Run for Something. Thank you so much. I know how busy the world is.
For you, for Fated Mates, anytime.
Well, it's such a great time. It's great to see you. I know we saw each other. The last time we saw each other, it was a Fated Mates Live, but it was 2 years ago, I want to say. So,
man, a lifetime ago.
A long time ago. A brighter time. Amanda, Run for Something is amazing. We talk about it all the time. We talk about it on Fated States when we do phone banks. We talk about you on the podcast a lot. But would you explain to everybody not only what it is, but how it came to be?
Yes. So Run for Something was born of the ashes of the 2016 election. I worked for Secretary Clinton's presidential campaign for 2 years. We lost, you may remember. And about a week after Election Day, I started hearing from friends from high school and college who were like, hey, Amanda, you're the only person I know that works in politics. If I want to run for office, because if Trump can be president, it seems like anybody can do this. What do I do? And at the time, if you were new to politics and you wanted to do more than vote and more than volunteer, there was nowhere you could go that would help you. That to me felt like really big problems, both with our democracy and with the Democratic Party. So along with my co-founder, Ross Morales-Ricchetto, we wrote a plan, we built a website, and we launched Run for Something on Trump's first inauguration day, thinking what a fun side project this will be. We'll get a couple people who want to run for local office, Cool hobby. Can't wait.
So, never intending for it to be a
No.
huge job.
We have had since then about 190,000 mostly young people, who have raised their hands to say they want to run for local office all across the country. We've endorsed more than 3,000 candidates. We've helped elect just about 1,500, nearly every state, mostly women, mostly people of color, to offices like state house, state senate, city council, school board, library board, who have gone on to do amazing things, some of whom have then gone on to run for Congress and are running for higher offices. And they are, I think, if not single-handedly, collectively changing what it means to be a leader right now. And we so badly need them.
It's true. It feels like we need a backbench. Or at least I remember in 2016, it felt that way. Like, how is it possible that we don't have such a strong backbench? And now you are building it. We've had a few people on over the years from other organizations. We love the States Project here at Fated Mates. But could you, for those people who aren't, maybe haven't been as plugged into politics and especially to local politics, explain why it's so important that you run for something on a local level?
So there are more than 500,000 local elected positions across the country. Obviously, most of them are not Congress, they're not governor, they're not statewide electeds. They are the kinds of small offices that make a really big difference in your quality of life. When you think about things like voting rights and reproductive health, climate change, criminal justice reform, student loans, housing, so much of that comes from either your state legislature, your city or county council, or whatever your county government might be, and your school board. These offices are winnable. They are manageable. Most of them are part-time. The way that you win them for most of these races is by just knocking doors and talking to voters. Some there's a little bit more. I mean, we might run ads for a big state ledge race. Maybe New York City Council is a little bit different, but 75% of school board races cost $1,000 or less. 85% cost $5,000 or less. You can do this even and especially if you have no experience in elected office before.
So one of the things that I'm most proud of is that we have at least one Fated Mates listener who heard the call a few years ago and ran for school board in her local election, and she won by a handful of votes in her local election, and she now sits on the school board. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about if there is somebody out there, and hopefully there are lots of listeners out there who are like, wait, I think I could do this. First of all, you've said over and over again that women especially need to be told they can do it. So one, will you tell everybody they can do it?
You can do this. You can do this. You can absolutely do this. One, look at some of these like chuckleheads we have in office right now.
You're already winners.
You are a reader, you care, you have community. You know that you are better than most of these folks who are serving in elected office right now. But more importantly than that, we have seen over the years thousands of totally ordinary people do this extraordinary thing of getting on the ballot. We are right now working with we have 41 endorsed candidates up in 2025, because 2025 is not an off year. There's actually nearly 100,000 elections this year alone, more than there will be in 2026, if you can believe that. And they include like just amazing leaders. We're working with this young woman in Manchester, New Hampshire, who is running for school board in Manchester Board of School Committee, Ward 8. She serves on the Student Conduct Committee. She's been pushing to expand support systems for kids with behavioral mental health needs. She's got a career in the county. She's married. She's got 3 kids. She wants to fight to make sure that the school is better for her family. And she's been doing things now like introducing a dual language immersion program and establishing a stricter cell phone policy in the school district. That's incredible. We need leaders like her in these offices. And she ran for the first time, having never done this before.
Amazing. What's her name?
Jessica Spillers in Manchester, New Hampshire.
Cool. Well, our New Hampshire listeners, I'm sure, are going to get out there and pay attention. So let's say there is somebody in the world who out there listening who's like, maybe I will do this. How? What do they do? What's the first step?
Okay, first thing you do is go to Run for Something's website. You can go to runforwhat.net and you can look up your exact address and see what offices are available for you to run for. We will tell you what's on the ballot this year and next, and give you some initial information about how to file. Then you're going to start getting information from our team. We do monthly candidate introduction calls where we talk through all the basics of how to run for office, talk through our program, if you're eligible for our endorsement, how that works. You'll get all the details there. But if you just want to start thinking about it right now, there's really 3 questions that you need to start to marinate on. 1, what is the problem you care about solving? What's the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning or keeps you agitated in the shower, or the thing that really inspires you and you want to do more of?
Just only one thing.
Dealer's choice. 2, what is the office that would give you power to do something about it? If the thing you care about is book bans, think about school or library board, or maybe state ledge, depending on where you are. If the thing you care about is abortion access, think about state ledge. If the thing you care about is housing, think about municipal government. And then 3, start to think about why voters should want you to win. You want to win because winning is great and losing sucks. Voters will want you to win because you can do something really specific and tangible to improve their lives. If you can answer those 3 questions, everything else about a campaign is logistics and how to communicate those answers to as many people as possible before the deadline of election day.
And then once you're on the ballot, you're going to reach out to us at Beta Mates and we're going to do phone bank for you. That's how it's going to work. You've already got us. You already have a big support team. You've got Run for Something. You've got Beta Mates. Together, we can rule the world. So Amanda, let's talk a little bit about, the elephant in the room. Let's talk about how scary everything is. What can we do aside from Run for Something?
I think there's a couple of things at play right now. One is call your member of Congress, call them every day. If you are represented by a Democrat, tell them to nut up and fight or whatever, ovary up and fight. If you're represented by a Republican, they need to hear from you too. Make sure that they know you're paying attention. Second thing you can do is, again, as I said, there's close to 100,000 elections this year. Every single election is a chance to show Trump and the Republican Party that their actions have electoral consequences. We've seen this already this year. In Iowa, Democrats flipped a state Senate seat that Trump had won by 21 points. In Oklahoma, we've already beaten 2 conservative incumbent mayors and flipped control of those cities. That's really meaningful. And we're going to see more of this in each of these elections over the next couple of months, both the special elections for the U.S. House, but also these local races, even and especially in red communities. So take a look at what's going on around you. Can you volunteer for a local race? Can you knock on doors for them? Make sure you vote if you have the opportunity to, because winning begets winning begets winning. And it shows the GOP that they should be acting as if they will be held accountable, because they will be held accountable.
And important to note, everybody, that a lot of these school board elections are in the spring, which is not expected. People don't think about elections until much later in the year, but make sure you pay attention and you check on when your local elections are. All but I think a few thousand of the 99,000 elections that are in 2025 happen between February and July 4th. So is it too late to run this year, largely, would you say? Not everywhere. There's still a few places where there are filing deadlines, but at this point, you should really be thinking about 2026. Now, that being said, Republicans get indicted all the time. There are always special elections coming up. I know that there's about to be some redistricting that might open up some other state ledge races in the end of this year. But right now, we're definitely looking to build as big of a funnel as we can, or big as a pool we can, for people thinking about running in 2026. Because actually, this is the third thing you can do. Start to mentally and practically prepare to win big next year. Because think about 2018, the work that we did in 2017, in the Virginia state ledge races, in the Georgia special election where John Ossoff came this close, in the countless other special elections and local elections that year, that built the muscle for winning that allowed us to go big in 2018. The House, mitigate loss in the Senate. I think we won the popular vote by 7 or 8 points. We flipped governor's mansions. We won 350 some odd state ledge seats. We did that because we did the work over the course of 18 months. We got to do the work now to win next year. And that means, the town halls, the calling your members of Congress, the building relationships in your community, voting in local elections. And beyond all of that,
just like mentally wrap your head. Because I know psychologically it feels so like doom and gloom right now. We're gonna win next year. And like, what are we gonna do to make sure that's true? Like, we're gonna win next year and we're gonna be able to do even more with that power that we hold.
Well, I mean, I'm manifesting that. Let's win next year. Let's do it. I'm in. And also just remember that get involved in your local community organizations, your local Democrats organizations, on the ground. All of these candidates need boots on the ground to knock on doors. You win a school board election for $1,000 if you knock on doors in those communities. And so volunteers matter.
They're so important, especially right now when people are justifiably so. I am too big mad at the Democratic Party. Yeah. Big mad. Like, if you're running locally, whether you're running as a Democrat or running in a nonpartisan race, you get to put a new face to the party in your community. Like, the way we fix the party, I get yelled at on the internet about this, but like the way we fix the party is by having better people running it. It's hard, but it's like not complicated.
And I reached out to you because I saw you responding to the op-ed from James Carville that I also viscerally responded to, which said, let's just all sit tight. There's nothing we can do right now, except there is a lot we can do right now. The way that, I think all the time about that Mississippi law that ended up in the Supreme Court and overturned Roe, if we were not sitting on our laurels waiting for a national election, what could we have done there? And so don't sit tight, everyone. Now's the time to build community. And
I've always said the best way to win a fight is, not engage. That's literally only true with my toddler. That is not true in any other circumstance in life. What is James Carville talking about?
Well, I've been asking that question for a while, so. Anyway, Amanda, thank you so much. Well, first of all, do you have any time to read these days? Is there anything that you've read that's great that you want to share?
Two things. Well, I got a chance to read your summer book.
You did?
Yes, your team sent me a copy. It's so good. I'm sure that all of your listeners have already pre-ordered it, but it is so fun and so like summer soapy, rich people behaving chaotically. I just finished Linda Holmes' new book, Back After This, which is about a podcast producer who becomes a host and finds love. And it's like a very sweet story.
I love her. I think she's so great. I love her books.
It's beautiful. It was like such a relaxing read, which I'm so glad to get into it.
Awesome. Well, two strong books, two strong recs, and not just because one of them was mine. Tell us again where we can find more information about Run for Something and donate, right? Everybody, you can go donate a little bit of money to or a lot of money to Run for Something and help these candidates get one.
So to look up where you can run, the best place to go is runforwhat.net because that's our special hub. It's run by a couple different sort of parts of our organization. You can enter your address. To learn more about the organization, you can go to runforsomething.net. You can volunteer. You can get details on running. You can absolutely give money. And of course, I would be remiss and probably yelled at if I didn't also mention I have a nonfiction book coming out in May, which I'm really excited about, called When We're in Charge, The Next Generation's Guide to Leadership. That's all about like, what does it mean for millennials and Gen Z to like own our power, both in politics, but especially outside of it, and how it'll look different. So you can pre-order that too.
Amazing. A perfect graduation gift.
A perfect graduation gift.
To the young person in your life who has got to save us all. So thank you, Amanda, so much. Thanks for making time. I know how busy you are, and I'm so grateful to you. And we are so grateful to Run for Something, and we're going to win next year. So I'm getting ready.
Thanks, Sarah.
Take care.
Ever since you suggested this topic, I've had like a lot of Madonna songs in my head.
Really?
Yeah. She's only got 4 minutes to save the world, Sarah. Her and Justin.
Wow. Okay.
Sorry.
A real deep cut.
I mean, is it though?
I mean, I guess
Madonna and Justin Timberlake is basically as mainstream.
It's not very deep. It's a very shallow cut, but
there you go.
But
now I'm with you.
It is not where I went at all. So,
oh, okay. Well, fair.
There you go. But that is because I don't feel like I'm as like musical as you are. You know, Eric does that too, where he's like instantly there's
like a song.
Y'all, if you're following us on Instagram, like every once in a while there's a song posted to an image there. And like almost always that's an Eric song. You and Mr. Reed's Romance, you're concert goers. So you're very like music is your thing. And that's
music
great.
is a thing we like. Yeah.
I feel like I was not raised by, and I often think like, is this because of like my parents not being American? Often I think about this, like,
oh, interesting.
The musical experience. Not that, I mean, listen, like, not that music doesn't transcend culture and boundaries, like, but I often feel like for my parents, like, music just wasn't a thing.
I think, you know, it's funny because I think of it being like really about me and my brothers, and also Casey Kasem.
Now, I was a top 40 girl when I was a child.
And I remember, like, at the end of the year in particular, everybody, I'm really dating myself, I don't care. At the end of the year, they would do, like, the top 100 countdown or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, like, my brothers and I would, like, sit around and, like, list them and, like, you know, sort of be like, did you catch what number 29 was or whatever?
So that's good. Did you have cable? Did you have, like, MTV?
Yes, not all the time. Mm-hmm. I remember when they wired our neighborhood for cable.
Whoa.
You couldn't get it because there wasn't literal cables under the ground.
Yeah.
And they came in one summer and like dug all these fucking trenches and laid it, and then people could get cable.
It's interesting because I remember, and like Eric is always like, how is this possible? But like, I'm a little younger than you. But my family did not have a color television until, like, I remember my dad won a color television in a raffle.
Wow.
I was maybe like 8. Listen, you guys, so that would make it the mid 80s, like color TVs. You all had color TVs before I did. Like, and the only reason why we had one was because he won it in a raffle. And then, like, we didn't have cable until years later, it feels like. Like, I was 10 or 12 by the time when we got cable. And so I also feel like I missed the MTV of it all also. And I do think MTV...
And you were too young for Friday night videos.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. So...
the name's just right there in the title. It's okay.
But I do feel like MTV really delivered music to... to the like Gen Xers in a way that it did not deliver it to me. And my siblings were both like full decade older than me. So they were like at college listening to music without me.
Some of my students have been coming to school with Discmans. And like, it's really cute. And then they like carry around their little stacks of CDs. So it's like very, you know what I mean? Like, it's a very specifically adorable thing. And I don't know why, but I was like looking through one of my drawers at work. I mean, I've worked there for a long time, so there's a lot of weird shit in my drawers. And I found my U2, my Octung Baby CD at I don't know why it was at work. Anyway, I brought it to this group of kids and I was like, hey, listen, I found this. And they were like, oh, and I was like, so I don't know, you're just gonna have to share it, I guess. So anyway, it was like really cute. But yeah, okay, sorry, but I teach house. I guess I'm talk about school week. I teach House of the Scorpion. And in this book, it's like in the future. And the bad guys, El Patron, and the kids are like, how old is he? And we have to like kind of work backwards from the information we know about the technology in the home. And the reason why is like his like house, the main house in this book is like essentially like Williamsburg, Virginia, but for him. It's like his own personal memories of what it was like to grow up in Durango. Mm-hmm. And so like we're kind of working backwards. And the key piece of information we have is that he was watching black and white TV. And I tell the kids the story about how like I still watched a black and white TV in the 80s, but it was like the back bedroom TV.
Did you have one that was inside a piece of furniture?
Oh, I didn't, but my grandparents did.
Okay, we had one that was inside a piece of furniture.
Like, I was like, you guys, like, just like now, I'm sure it's true for a lot of you, like, your mom and dad gets a new phone, and then you get, like, the hand-me-down phone. Like, that's been the case, but it was, like, with TVs, like, right? Like, so you got a new TV, and then, like, the old black and white TV got demoted to, like, the back bedroom, and that's where
the kids watch TV. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, listen, so that is two olds discussing technology.
you know who's on a ticking clock, Sarah? Us in our lives.
I know, right? I was talking to somebody last night, actually, about the fact that, like, and I feel like maybe I've stop me if you've heard this one, Jen. But right now in the world, a movie that I keep coming back to and thinking, like, we should really watch this movie is The Sound of Music. Have we talked about this on the podcast?
No, but I do love The Sound of Music.
Me too. But here's the thing. I feel like if I showed my child The Sound of Music, she'd be like, what the fuck is this? And why are we watching it? And part of it is because these kids today don't understand that it's Christmas and that's what's on TV.
Right, exactly. You're like, this is what we're watching.
It takes 18 hours to watch it because there are 72 commercial breaks. Like, in my head, The Sound of Music is the longest movie ever made.
It actually also is the longest movie ever. Okay. It's very long. It is very long, for sure.
And so, like, and I just feel like these kids, they don't understand.
Yeah, they don't get it.
You watch everybody, like, The Sound of Music is in all of our brains when we think about Nazis because all were forced to watch it because that's what was on television.
You know, when Little Romance was home over winter break, The Sound of Music was on, and I was like watching it, and he sat down and watched with me for a while, and he's like, this is actually better than I thought it would be. And I was like, thank you. He did get bored and like wandered off, but
I mean, there are some pretty boring parts of that movie.
Sure. But the other day, we were talking at work about A Christmas Story, and I made this joke about how, like, you know, we have I have some, you know, colleagues who are in their 20s. And I made this joke that was like, yeah, you guys don't remember, but like there was this old movie, A Christmas Story, where like, and I can't remember what I was referencing, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I know. You know, it was like a snowsuit and he couldn't put his hands down.
Mm-hmm.
Right? She like kept pushing his hands down and they drift back up. And one of my other colleagues who's closer to my age was like, wait, do people not know what A Christmas Story is? And I was like, no, why the fuck would they?
No. But they see that leg lamp all over the place. And they have no idea that it's a reference. They just don't know. But we've talked about this with romance too, right? Like, there are so many things that get referenced and like they don't know the original text that it's coming from, which is, I mean, I guess cool in its own way, right? By the way, everybody, The Sound of Music is 2 hours and 52 minutes long. And that does seem long, but also, you know, it takes time to defeat Nazis. So that is my message of hope to you. I mean, let's talk about Christopher Plummer being fucking hot and ripping that Nazi flag to pieces, shredding, ripping it down, tearing it
I
up.
will admit, I do think that Little Romance, who's a young gay man, was like, that guy seems hot. I was like, welcome to my world.
You want to come online? You come online at that image. Did he recognize it from like internet?
Yeah, I think some of it for sure. I mean, we were watching the beginning part though, because he was like, why do their clothes look like that? And I was like, well, she sewed them out of curtains. And he was like, beep, 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 back it up.
This is the opposite of The Sound of Music, but Gone with the Wind, she also sews clothes out of curtains. Was that just a thing that we did when we didn't have a lot of...
I was not a Gone with the Wind girly.
I mean, I'm not surprised. But the point is that there is, I mean, you do know she puts on a dress that's made of the curtains, right?
No, literally, I know. I'm proud to tell everybody out there that I have never interacted in any way with any part of...
It predated other things, but...
Yeah, for sure.
But
yeah, it just
irrelevant.
wasn't my thing.
Like, I don't want to get into the weeds on Gone with the Wind, but I do have a question about making clothes from curtains.
Making clothes out of curtains. Well, I think, sure.
I mean, it feels like there's just yards and yards of fabric. The kids are growing, might as well.
Exactly. There it is.
I'm actually kind of surprised that I can't think of right now a romance novel where we make clothes out of curtains, but it feels like that should have existed in historicals. And so if you're out there and you're like, oh, I got one, please let me know.
Yeah, for sure.
Has to be.
Well, there has to be.
I can think of like a dozen romance novels where like the nanny gets punked by the children as she falls. The governess gets punked by the children as she falls in love with the owner of the house.
The romanticizing of the past in romance is usually about men doing work, not women. And that's why I think it doesn't exist. Like, he's up on a roof thatching.
All dukes are master thatchers.
Even though he's a duke. But, like, I don't want to see any of these bitches sewing in a historical romance. I don't. Like, you're better than that.
Listen.
Sewing is actually fun.
If anybody out there meets a duke, for real, like, if you're just walking down the street in California and meet Prince Harry, please ask him if he's a master thatcher.
Oh, my God.
And
we're so wrong for that.
Please report it. Why? He's a duke. He's now a homeowner.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is brought to you by 1001 Dark Nights, publishers of Office Sparks, a workplace romance collection.
I love an anthology.
Same.
And the reason why I love an anthology is twofold. One, I love just like quick little bites of things that I love. So like quick novellas, all of which you and I are both on the record for loving an office romance.
It's true.
Call HR, everybody. I'll tell them why it's hot. Right to their face. And I also love it because often in an anthology, there's an author who you haven't read, or there's somebody who maybe like you've heard about but haven't quite gotten to. And in this case, when 1001 Dark Nights is doing these anthologies, they are collecting authors who know the job. These are longstanding romance novelists who have these delicious novellas that are now packaged up in these great ebook collections. This one is all workplace romances by C.D. Reese, Kay Bromberg, Laurelyn Page, and Heather Graham. And this is going to deliver all of that like sexy, conflict-laden tension in forbidden crushes and rivals and secret affairs that they have to hide from everyone in the office. These are going to deliver high heat and really fantastic romance. And I don't hate it. I'm definitely going to read the hell out of this one.
Yeah, I mean, these are for authors who know the job. So if you are interested in checking out the Office Sparks collection and your podcasting app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now to buy the book. It is available in paperback or with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. Thanks to 1001 Dark Nights for sponsoring this week's episode.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to Fated Mates. I'm Sarah McLean. I read romance novels and I write them.
I'm Jennifer Prokop, romance reader and editor.
And this is what we do sometimes.
You know what? I think it's fine.
Listen, Jen had a rough week. I had kind of a rough week. So we're taking a little break and we're going to talk about something that is about, you know, a lot of people when they listen, they send us messages and they say like, you're always sort of referencing craft stuff in romance novels, like what it, you know, why something works. And one of the reasons why we started doing these trope episodes, I mean, like back in the day, was that we wanted to talk about like, okay, road trip romances, like what do they do? What's the purpose that they're serving? How are they crafted? What makes a good one? And I think we continue to do that work. One of the things that we talk about a lot, or that I talk about a lot when I do my conflict workshops, is the value of a ticking clock. And so that's why this week we're going to talk about ticking clocks in romance.
Sarah, would you please explain what a ticking clock is?
Yeah, but to do that, I have to talk about conflict, which is going to be really rough for me. But, okay, as you all know, I believe that conflict is like the most important thing in all storytelling. And, you know, genuinely in life. Conflict is valuable. It's where tension exists, and that's where interesting storytelling happens. And it also is the gas in the engine for a whole book. So if you don't have enough conflict, the book is going to get tough to get through. It's going to get a little boring. It's going to sag a little. It's probably going to be a little sad in the middle, and that is because there just isn't enough going on to keep you engaged. So for me, when I come to a book as a writer or as a reader, I think a lot about like, how much conflict can we pack into this thing to make sure that like the pages keep turning? If like, I'm sure I've said on the podcast before, if it takes you longer than 6 hours to read my books, then like I've done something wrong, and that's because of conflict.
Can I like do a little bit of talk about conflict before we move on? Okay, so I think one of the big like a misunderstanding, right, is that like in real life, people like talk about conflict as something to be avoided, right? Like we think of it as negative, right? Like we have a hard time with it, right? So I think there is sort of sometimes like a way in which like if like
it's misrepresented.
It like exists differently out in the world than it does when we're talking about it in a book, like as a structure, right?
But also, Jen, in like real world conversation, right?
Yeah,
like. The best conversations often are like, you love a movie and I didn't love it so much. Tell me why. Conflict.
Correct. Exactly. And that's what we're saying when we're talking about conflict. So like you are at work and everybody agrees that like something X needs to happen. But like people have different ideas about how it should happen. That's conflict.
Mm-hmm. conflict's also like how we learn, how we engage with the world.
So it's not a bad thing. Like conflict is just like a normal thing because different people have different ideas about how to achieve the same goal, or like there's only one of something and both people want it, or right. Like, so there's lots of ways in which conflict is just like a normal part of our everyday life. It's actually impossible to avoid.
Right.
So when we talk about conflict in books, what we're just talking about is like, how do these two people view the world through a different lens? And then when are they going to decide that they actually like care about doing something the same way or agree to, whatever, however they're going to like manage that conflict. But I do feel like this thinking conflict is bad or can be eliminated or always should be avoided is not actually great for storytelling.
And you don't have to write the way I do, where it's like, how many times can people punch each other in the face? Like sometimes it's, like you said, as simple as a conversation. Like every romance hero who has ever said, I am not for love, love is not for me, like that's conflict, right? Like these kinds of like internal conflicts exist so that, and they push the story forward just as much. But like anytime you see a character like bump up against something, that's conflict.
Right.
That said, it can be very difficult for a certain type of writer. Like some writers, like me, gravitate toward it. Other writers are naturally averse to the idea of like extreme conflict or any conflict at all. And so like they find themselves having to like find ways, like tips, tricks, and ways for you to amp up conflict in a book, right? And there are a million different ways to do it. And there are many that are my favorites. But one of the classic ways to amp up conflict in a romance novel is to establish a ticking clock, right? And what that means is the story begins, and then at the end of the story, a thing will be completed. So it's like a house party romance. And like the book is only, like these characters are only together for the duration of this house party, right? It's like a vacation, like a romance in paradise, like these people are on a vacation. The book only exists like at the end of the vacation, they are going to separate and like go their separate ways. So like, can they fall in love before the end of the vacation? A road trip romance is always a ticking clock. Like they're on their way to a place, and whatever, like the time that they are together on the journey to that place. And it can be, I have like a million examples of how this all works, but like it can be the threat of discovery, like a person is in disguise. We know that they're going to get found out. That's a ticking clock. So it can be overt in the text, like we have 2 weeks until X, or it can be just sort of like a sense of building nervousness, like a kind of building tension of like what happens when this is over.
So that's like one continuum. It's just like kind of, does it work? Does it like serve the story you want to tell? Because the problem with like a ticking clock can also be that it is like a false way, like, or like, like an author thing. And let me give you an example. One kind of ticking clock that I think almost always is a disservice to the story is to map out the event, map out the romance, onto like an external calendar, like a sports season or a school year. This happens a lot in F1 romances that I've read, right? So it's like the beginning of the book is the beginning of the F1 season. And I know that the end of the book is going to be the end of the season. And yet there's a way in which like sometimes I'm like, you're so caught up in trying to like stick to this calendar and what it means for readers. And like maybe the F1 example, I've seen it happen. A school year is actually a really good example, right? Like what you have taught the reader is like nothing's going to happen till May. And so I think the thing about a ticking clock is it has to really be driven by the story itself. Now, I guess a ticking clock, if it's like, okay, I'm a
but that's
researcher.
Not really a ticking clock, right? Like that's so much time.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
that's my point.
A ticking clock has to feel like the bomb's going to go off. Like if we don't get out of this house, there's a bomb going off.
Right. And so I think that that's a really key thing about a ticking clock for me is immediacy. It can't just be like, but I think I guess I was really interested in time in general as I started thinking about this, because I was kind of like, when does it work? When does it not? And yet the immediacy, it has to feel in their face. It has to feel oppressive almost.
Yeah. I mean, I love a ticking clock. And anybody who has read my books knows I love a ticking clock. Like almost all of my books have it in some form or another. Like the structure of it, of my books, lends themselves to, but I like a short romance. Like, I don't know. I don't want this to sound like I'm saying this is the only way. I'm saying,
no,
like,
of course not.
For me as a writer and also as a reader, I gravitate toward romance that feels so breathless because it happens so fast. So like, if you look at my books, I think I've written 20 of them, and I would think probably 15 of them are 2 weeks and they're in love.
Yeah.
Some of them are even shorter than that. Like really, really tight time frames. And I think it's because I like external conflict so much that the pacing of the book has to go fast.
Do you think it's also in historical romance because of the constraint of like the season?
I think there's that. I think it's also like once two people leave each other in historicals, like there is a real possibility they will never stumble into each other again. Right? Like,
okay.
I mean,
Yeah, right. Sure.
Like, if it's like, well, now I'm going away to my parents' home for the rest of the year, like, well, anything could happen there, right? And then we can't like really pull the tension tight again because we have to start over when they come back together.
Yeah, and that's, I think, my point about, like, calendar is not ticking clock. I think that's what I was trying to say, right? Like, and sometimes I think people treat it like it is. And I'm like, don't do that. 9 months from now, he's going to go back. He's been a researcher and we've been students together. Like, that's not a ticking clock.
That's just a job.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like, if you think about F1 or, like, the NFL season, like,
yes,
that's his
job season. Yeah.
Right?
And in fact, it almost is like the opposite. Like, right? Like, you're like, what you've taught me is they're not going to get together until the Super Bowl. And if I know anything about the sports season and it's October, then I know that whatever is happening right now is actually not that big of a deal. Right? And so sometimes I feel like calendar works against you in a way that ticking clock does not. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense?
No, but it's interesting, right? Because now I'm thinking about Ted Lasso, which everybody, if you've listened to the podcast for a long time, right? Like we did 2 episodes on Roy Kent on season 1 and season 2 of Ted Lasso. We didn't touch season 3 because it didn't go the way that we thought it should go.
I didn't finish watching it, Sarah.
I mean, I bless you on that. But and that's as much as we have to say about season 3 of Ted Lasso. No, listen, the promise of the premise
TV show is going down. I'm done.
No, you can't set. Okay. You cannot. It's not enough. I have to say it. You cannot set up an entire 3 seasons of television with this concept of like the rom-com is the greatest thing that has ever been and then shit the bed on every romance. That is what I have to say about that. But
all right,
Roy Kent is great in season 1 and season 2, and we did 2 episodes on it. But Ted Lasso is really interesting because in both of those, and again, it's not a romance, right? Like, I mean, it's a show. But the ticking clock in Ted Lasso is in a little bit, I mean, the structure, not a ticking clock. The structure of the show is this is the season of soccer, right?
Yeah.
Of football.
Right.
And there is this sort of threat, like the team might get relegated.
Right.
Right. And then and so like there is this sort of sense of dread, like if we don't sort out what we're doing, the team could lose.
It's big stakes, right?
It's big stakes. And it's big stakes because for everyone on the whole cast, every character is a big stake. It's stakes for everyone. I think it can work. I think Susan makes it work in Chicago Stars now and then. Like that first book, It Had to Be You, right, is about she inherits the team. And then it's like, well, can she succeed?
Well, but Susan is very smart about how much sports she puts in there. I think like actually the ticking clock that I was for Susan that I think is really interesting is Heaven, Texas. Because the ticking clock is the filming of the movie. Right? And so once the movie is over, then Gracie has to either get hired by the company or go back to Ohio. And so that the ticking clock is very explicitly about like the movie being filmed and how, it's like a summer. And so that is like an example to me that's like really interesting because it's the one where she's very clear on what the stakes are for her. And Bobby Tom does not understand. He is not on the same ticking clock that she's on.
Yep.
And I think that's partly why it's like so incredibly effective.
Yes. 1,000%. I mean, I would also say that in our old school category romance, we talked about, what was the name of that book? Wait, just give me a second to think. Deborah Smith's Hot Touch, and this is also a movie set where the heroine can communicate with animals. She's an animal telepath.
Sure.
And there's a dog or something in this book that's not behaving properly. And like she gets hired into this like house in Louisiana where, she has to basically communicate with a dog who's like sad because his girlfriend is chained up in the house next door. Listen, it's all great. And then she falls for this like the grumpy owner of this home because, and again, like, when these two separate, there is no way this animal empath and this like grumpy New Orleans guy are ever going to see each other again. This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Lumi Gummies. Consistent, mellow, and super delicious, Lumi Gummies are specifically designed to make you feel good, not stoned. Whether you're looking for an end-of-day de-stressor, a midday mood boost, or help getting the best sleep ever, Lumi Gummies has a strain that's right for you.
I am often looking for the best sleep ever. And so that's the high I am chasing, everybody. So the indica dominant gummies offer that grounded and sleepy feeling. So these are great like nighttime gummies. And the one I like is called Cotton Candy Crush. They have one that's like more sour if you like that flavor. But I really like that one. And so, for me, it's often I can fall asleep, but sometimes not stay asleep. And so if that's like the situation I'm in, I might like wake up in the middle of the night and try a gummy. And the great thing about it is I will sleep through the night and then like wake up without feeling really like kind of woozy or out of it. So it's sort of just like the perfect way for me to like get through the night and sleep.
Nice. Well, if you would like to try Lumi Gummies, you can do that. They are available nationwide. You can go to lumigummies.com. That's LUMI gummies.com and use the code FATEDMATES for 30% off your order. Again, that's LUMI gummies.com. And the code is FATEDMATES. Thanks to Lumi Gummies for sponsoring this week's episode. Category does ticking clocks really great because the tightness, you have to do it in 55,000 words. So, we're only together for 5 days is, oops, I got pregnant.
That's a big ticking clock in romance. I don't even want to talk about it.
Yeah, it's tricky. When we decided this a couple days ago.
Yeah.
And I thought, there must be some that I think are like the best, most masterful. And I'm sure there are, but like, I don't know that I would say
White Out by Audra and Anders.
I actually didn't put that on my list because we talk about it so much, but obviously. But
I mean,
if you're trying to understand the concept, that is a book to read.
Yeah, because it literally, once they go on, I mean, there's bad guys after them and they have to make it essentially 300 miles and they have 21 days worth of food in Antarctica on a sled and they're doing it on foot.
Yep.
And once they start, and it's like pretty far into the book. I was actually really interested. It's like about a quarter of the way into the book. It's chapter 15. That she starts marking off this at the top of the chapter, right? Like think about like a movie where it's like, base station, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
And it's like day 1, 302 miles to Volkov Station, 21 days of food remaining.
Yep.
And so once you get to that, you are literally on the clock, and all you can think about is how are they going to make it? Because every single time they don't get as far as they need to, or there's some sort of setback, you think about how much food they have.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, to me, when you said ticking clock, this was the first book I thought of. Like,
it's interesting you bring that up because I have a book in my head. And it's one of the situations where, I'm sorry, everybody, I know that we're still trying to find the book where the lady's pregnant in the like thatched cottage. And like, I like, listen, that's a old Fated Mates deep cut. But there is a book in my head where they are basically certain they are going to die.
Yeah.
And I can't, it's not Whiteout. And I cannot, like, I've literally for 3 days been trying to summon it from my inside my brain. But this is the most emotional. Like, if you can think of, it's that moment in Toy Story 3 where they're like headed into the incinerator and like it's burning down there and you're like, and they all end up just like holding each other's hands because like, and it's really like, it's Toy Story 3 and I'm like weeping, right? Because it is that sort of the intensity of like, well, this is it, right? We're at the end. And I think, you know, books like Waking Up with the Duke, right?
Yeah.
Like the emotional agony of now it's the end of our 30 days together and we have to separate despite the fact that now we love each other more than we ever did. These kinds of just like anything that amps up the emotion here ends up being like the clock just ends up being such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
You know, yes, we're together for 30 days. Or like, you know, I think about, you know, Judith McNaught's Perfect does this. He's like escaped from prison and they know like, he's going to get caught. Like that's going to be the end of their time together, right? That adds forced proximity into the mix too, because they're trapped in a snowstorm. But like these kinds of books where there is just the reader is absolutely convinced these two cannot be together in the end.
I think you've already realized we're going to end up like talking about books that like we've mentioned before or whatever. And it's funny because of course I was like, you know, what have I been reading recently? And a bunch of them, I think, use a ticking clock really effectively to essentially it's like, okay, remember those Fast and the Furious movies where they're just like driving really fast and then they like press the button and it goes faster? Because here's the thing. Okay, Whiteout is brilliant, but I think it is very difficult to come up with a premise where the ticking clock is literally 3/4 of the book.
Well, that's because you believe that they're going to die at the end.
I mean, like there's ticking clocks where it's not quite that like high, right? Like the house party or whatever. But I think a lot of times you can just use ticking clocks. So instead it's like that's
road trips,
right? Like it's not the only lever, right? So in like last week I was talking about that book Fiasco, right? Where like they have to find like one guy who's like kidnapped a child and there's like a timestamp on that. But then along comes, you have to turn in this guy you've been working with to me because he's wanted. So that's like, so it's like 2 ticking clocks, but they are different. One is about her emotional connection to this man, and then one is the external plot, which also has an emotional connection, right? But they're like, and that I think too is also really interesting, like being pulled between these 2 things that are happening that are like kind of racing along that you don't want either of them to happen. So, I mean, in that case though, like I was kind of like, wow, it was already tension filled, but like the tension wasn't between the 2 main characters. That gets installed by you're going to have to turn in your lover. And I think that's back to like Heaven, Texas. Like if they're on different ticking clocks, we have to understand how and why. That makes sense.
I think it does. I also think that another way that one can work, that like that sort of external ticking clock works often in historicals. Although it can happen, it can be in contemporaries too, is one of them is getting married to another person.
Yeah, right.
And like, so there is sort of this sense of, and like, don't mistake the possibility that one of them is getting married to another person and it's not necessarily at the beginning of the book, right? So like in my book, One Good Earl Deserves a Lover, right? The clock starts to tick halfway through when he is forced to be engaged to like the bad guy's daughter, right?
Yeah.
So like they're deployed in different ways. But then you think of something like Diana Quincy's Her Night with a Duke, another book we did a deep dive on, where like he's engaged to her stepdaughter. And like she didn't know when they met, but like that relationship, that wedding is looming.
Okay, I want to talk about Along Came Amor by Alexis Daria, which doesn't come out until May, but I just read it. We loved the first two books. I'm sure people are really excited. I know that's why I was like, I have to read this, right? So the main character is Ava. She falls in love. She like meets Roman, and essentially it's like a one-night stand, right? And so she's just like, I can't do anything more. She's just gotten divorced. Like the day she meets him, her divorce is finalized, and she's like, I'm gonna like embrace new Ava. She goes down to this bar. She's at like a hotel for a teaching conference, and she meets him, and is kind of like, why not? Like, why not? I deserve this, right? And then he gives her her number. He gives her his number, but she's like, one night only, buddy. I can't, you know what I mean? Like, this was great, but it was great. And then they like kind of drift into like an affair. She kind of gives in and like kind of texts him when she's feeling like, I think another thing comes up in her life. And she's like, maybe I can call Roman. Anyway, what happens is eventually they realize that he's the best man and she's the maid of honor at this upcoming wedding. She didn't even know that he knew Jasmine. It's Jasmine's wedding from book one. It's Ashton's like best friend who he had been out of touch with for a long time. That's why like Ava never even heard this guy's name mentioned. And the part that I thought was really interesting is like the ticking clock is about her feelings. Because Ava does not want to tell anyone in her family or her cousins that she is with Roman. But, like, they're in a wedding together. Everyone's going to fucking figure it out. And Roman is like, and then Ashton figures it out. And Ashton's like, you cannot ask me to keep this from my soon-to-be wife. Like, we're getting married. I can't start it by, like, keeping these secrets. And so basically what Roman and Ava talk about is you have to tell Jasmine by the wedding, and that then becomes the ticking clock, right?
Yep.
You have to tell her. It cannot be that like we go to this, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And what was really interesting, Sarah, is even though I deeply understood Ava's reluctance to let her family know, right? Like they were pretty awful to her when the divorce happened and they weren't really supportive. And, there's a lot of like teasing framed as, it's love, but it like is teasing, and she really struggles with that and like kind of her place in the family. And she at one point is like, okay, I'm going to go tell her. And she cannot do it. Cannot bring herself to do it. And it's really was sort of fascinating to me because it felt like it was clearly a ticking clock, but it just felt deeply emotional.
Yeah.
Because here is a character who is like, I know that it's wrong to ask people to keep these secrets from me on one hand, but I cannot tell people because I'm so afraid of how they'll treat me once they know. And it just was like, I thought incredibly well done, but an example of like a ticking clock where like this person feels like there is an anvil over their head. And we as the reader are like, you're not in danger. That's a paper tiger. It's okay. This is your family. They're going to love you. This is Jasmine.
No matter bestie. What. Yeah.
And so anyway, it just was like and then to see Roman be like, we're honestly kind of hurt by it. Like, I am in love with you. Why won't you tell your family about me? I am not, like, I'm a good guy.
Yeah.
And so it really was an example, I thought, of how it was like a ticking clock. Yes, an external clock, the wedding, but all of the feelings about it were internal.
Yeah.
And I thought it was super effective.
Yeah, I like that a lot. This is a very good way to deploy friends to lovers. It's probably one of the only ways I'm willing to accept friends to lovers is this like kind of idea that like these two people who really like each other like feel like they have to hide from an external force. And because, again, like one of the things that I complain about with friends to lovers is that often there is no conflict at all. Like, why? You already like each other. Everybody knows you're friends. Like, what is the thing that is preventing you from just making a go of it? But in that kind of structure, in this kind of structure, it can really work. This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Lucy Score, author of Story of My Life.
Well, Sarah, if name is destiny, then the place you would go if you were a struggling romance novelist who could not write the next book. You had a bad breakup and you have writer's block like nobody's ever seen before. You also would go to Story Lake. And in this town, Hazel Hart she's like, I'm going to leave Manhattan behind and buy this historic home online for Story Lake, Pennsylvania. Only once she gets there, she finds out that this town and the house she bought are kind of a wreck, right? The biggest employer has shut down. People are out of work. And, her house is full of raccoons and it's just a mess. So she's going to find herself a contractor and fix up her house and fix up her life. And her contractor is Campbell Bishop. He is gorgeous. He is going to fix up this new spider museum she's calling a house, and also agrees for research purposes to do a little bit of fake dating. And so now all of a sudden Hazel isn't just writing a romance novel, she is living in one. So she's got to get this book finished, lock it up with this man, and also earn her happily ever after.
Listen, Lucy Score knows how to write a book, everybody. You're going to have a great time. If you are looking for a deluxe special edition, there is a print version of this book available wherever you get your print books. It has beautiful designed edges and glossy covers and chapter art, and a map of the town. You can get that anywhere you get print books, but you can also get it in ebook or with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. Thanks to Lucy Score for sponsoring this week's episode. There are a couple of books that I thought about. I know that you talked about Curvy Girl Summer, but by Danielle Allen, right? You've talked about that book, right?
Yeah, last summer, I think.
Yeah. So the structure of this book is the main character, Aaliyah, is turning 30. So here's another way, okay, obviously when I made a list immediately. I just sat down, and sometimes this is, and I'm sure you do this too. We come up with our idea and then I just verbally vomited just every book I could think of. Right. And they were the first, say 15 were historicals because there are so many ways that historicals deploy this in so many different directions. And then I was like, okay, what about contemporaries? And one of the things that I love about this is, so essentially, Aaliyah is saying she's turning 30 and she's like, I am going to find myself and a man by the time I'm going to have a date to my 30th birthday party. Right. So there it is. There's our end game. There's our end goal. We know the 30th birthday party is going to be, it is not a year. It's not a whole season. It's I'm going to get there. And we know that the book is going to come to a climax at the 30th birthday. I see your face. I see your face.
Climax.
I heard
I'm
it.
fine.
I heard it.
I'm fine. Oh. You said climax.
So what's really interesting about this, though, is that so we see her sort of. This is another kind of friends to loversy books, right? We see her misstep. She has a bunch of failings. She tries, it's largely online dating, right? But there's a local bartender where she often meets these people, and Ahmad, the bartender, is around and in the world with her, right? He's seeing her, come up empty every time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it's just this very great way of deploying a ticking clock without deploying it as an intense at the end of it, we're going to die.
Right.
Even though And what's interesting is I think it just speaks to like Danielle Allen being very talented, because I actually don't think it's very easy to structure a book this way and like continually remind us that there is an important ending that we are working toward without some kind of like almost over the top conflict.
Right.
So that's Curvy Girl Summer.
Right. Well, and I think like the reason we thought it was like worthwhile to talk about, like just, and it made me think of this as you were talking about Curvy Girl Summer, is like, because I don't want people listening to think like, oh, well, this isn't a useful craft tool for me if I'm not writing they're gonna die in Antarctica. Right?
No, but what's interesting, Jen, is I would say, like, I mean, listen, 30%, I think, is a reasonable percentage of recent contemporaries have deployed fake dating.
Yeah.
And fake dating does not, listen to me, does not work without a ticking clock.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to say too. I literally wrote fake dating on mine.
It does not work. And sometimes it's as simple as like, you know, I have to go, like, okay, Nana Malone. I'm just going to keep talking about books.
Yeah.
Nana Malone's Sexy in Stilettos is structurally, so you'll see all the things about Nana's books that are in here. There's like a mystery. There's a little bit of like what's, you know, so some bad guy action happening in here. But in Sexy in Stilettos, it's like the heroine has come home. She's found her sister in bed with her fiance. They are about to get married. The sister and the fiance now are getting married. Her father has like fired her from the family business because she's like made it all difficult, and she still has to attend this wedding. This is a classic fake dating setup, right? Like, I need a date to my sister's wedding. Of course, dialed up to 11 by Nana because the sister's marrying the ex-fiance, right? Like, and there are all these other external factors going on. They have, she runs into this man who, classic Nana is like a billionaire, but like she thinks she thinks he's a bartender. She like convinces him to be her fake date to this wedding, and it's 10 days from now, right? And like, there it is, 10 days. That's the structure. Mm-hmm. We know it's going to end at the end of 10 days. And we know that at the end of 10 days, there are all these other things that are going to like, well, if they even make it to 10 days, right? Because Nana's also deploying, like, there's a baddie who's after the, you know, like there are all these other things that are happening externally that are like threatening the successful 10-day fake relationship internally and externally, right? Because on top of it, this hero like doesn't believe in love or whatever, right? Like has classic romance hero, you know, illness. and so like this, but this is a good example of like fake dating is one piece of a much larger, you know, structure that does deploy. We have 10 days.
Another one that I thought was really effective at like a ticking clock was Fan Service by Rosie Danon. So the beginning of this book is that Devin, it's great. He was the star of an X-Files type TV show. Mm-hmm. And the show is over, and he is now kind of like basically like a little bit of a pathetic loser. Like, this was like the high point of his career. He did it. It was like a long show, 10 years maybe or whatever. And what happens is that he in the show was like an FBI agent who was also like a werewolf or something. Mm-hmm. And he is like desperate to bring this show back because he's like, no one will hire me, and if we revive the show, then maybe I will, you know, kind of find my career again. Mm-hmm. He's a bit of a himbo, but also like really starts the book in a low place. So what happens is one night at the full moon, he actually turns into a werewolf, and he does not know why. And he ends up essentially, this is like the himbo part of him. He's like Googling, like, I turned into a werewolf, and he kind of trips into this is like, it's so great. It's such a great premise. And he trips into essentially emailing this woman who was like who ran the fan club for this show. So he sends an email, which is like gets forwarded, right? Like essentially like it's one of those things where like it gets forwarded into Alex's actual inbox. She lives in Florida. And she's like, wait, this dumbass is like contacting me. And she, like, for kind of personal reasons, kind of has never liked him or like has decided to not like him, but she loved her fandom. So he shows up in her town, essentially like, you have to figure out why I'm not a werewolf anymore. And the ticking clock is the next full moon.
Perfect.
Right?
Perfect.
We only have however many days left now to figure this out because I'm going to turn into a werewolf again.
Paranormal does this really well, right? Like you think about, like basically every werewolf book, right? Like, or Cressley, for example, with the on the full moon having to like mark their mates, right? And so it's like, well, we better figure out how this is going to happen before. It's like structurally, it lends itself to that. Some sort of like transformation.
Exactly. And so like this is the ticking clock for him. And the thing that is like great about the book again is like the stakes are different. He is like, I can't do this again. Someone caught him like transforming and like put it on like TikTok or whatever. And they thought that he was doing it to like just gain attention. Like you know what I mean? Like, look at how pathetic he is that he was trying to do this. And so Alex is essentially like so steeped in the lore of this show and also works at like a vet. And that's why she's like, okay, sure, I'll help you figure this out or whatever. It's great. But like it takes her a while to kind of believe that he is not fucking with her. Right? So the whole premise is like for him, there is nothing more terrifying than this thing coming at him.
Yep.
And she doesn't even really think it's real. So I think it's also a really good example of like the clock is ticking for one of them, but the other one is kind of like, whatever. Come on.
Yeah.
And so them working to figure this out and like all of the things that they have to do to figure it out is actually, and how, like then the secret of like, wait, how does he actually turn into a werewolf? I think that's one of the greatest things about this book for me is you kind of forget like, wait, why is this happening? And how is it mapping on exactly to the lore of the show? Like what is going on?
It.
Yeah.
And
it's really
she
terrific.
sorts that out.
Yeah, they do. By the end, they sort out a lot. It's really, I think, really, again, like a really clever twist on the ticking clock because the ticking clock is, he doesn't think he's going to die, but he is like, I don't know what's happening to me and I don't like it. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
So structurally, I think ticking clocks occur in a variety of different ways, right? So we've talked about fake relationship. We've talked about, we talked about house parties vaguely, but I think like a good example of that would be, and again, I know I've talked about this a million times, but Lisa Kleypas is again, The Magic is a really terrific version of this where like, there are a group of people who've come to visit like a country house in England. One of them is the former like stable boy at this house who was in love with the like daughter of the Earl. I think it's an Earl, right? That's what Westcliff is. And he was pushed out. There's sort of like this mystery of what happened in the past. And now he's like gone to America, made his fortune. He's returned for full on revenge. And he's just there for like the short, it's like a week. Like it's such a tight time frame. And like what is great about this is Kleypas, this is the quietest, loudest book there is in romance. Like it's
a great way to say it. I love it.
It's so internal, like the conflict between them, like they are so desperately in love with each other. And of course, like there's a reason why he was pushed out. There's a reason why she never tried to find him. Like there are all these sort of like really rough things in their backstory that like make it so emotional. But ultimately, you are just driven to be obsessed with this book because she keeps thinking like, if I can just survive 1 week with him under my roof, then he'll leave forever.
Yeah,
and I can just go back to being normal and not loving him so desperately, but not being able to have him. And so like this idea is in your head, you're like, this all like, it's a ticking clock almost in reverse. Like she just has to survive it.
Yes, right.
And it's so well done. And then I think forced proximity does this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like anytime there is like a snowstorm or a like, you know.
Yeah. Can I talk about one that I thought was really great at this? Because it's more than like it was forced proximity, and it was like really interesting to me. And so the book is called One Last Night by Lauren Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is okay, so her family has owned a like a really popular kind of restaurant called, I think, like the Shark Biscuit. It's like on like it's in Australia, and it's like on the water on this like wharf or whatever. And it is the last night the restaurant will be open. So it's like,
yeah, you've talked about this one before. Yeah,
I think so. So it's like final night that the restaurant will be open. And so Agnes's family owns the restaurant, and the love interest is the cook, and his name is Harrison.
Mm-hmm.
And they have hated each other forever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like the last night at the restaurant. And so like, and the thing that happens, it's like so brilliant, is a huge rainstorm sweeps in, like torrential fucking rain. And so all of the people who are in the restaurant and Agnes and Harrison are essentially like trapped in there overnight because they can't get out. And so the restaurant, and like this is it. They're never going to see each other again after tomorrow, because Harrison will no longer work there and her family will no longer own this restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the whole book takes place in 24 hours.
Oh, so good.
Right? It's really good. And look,
this is hard to do.
It is hard to pull off.
Yep.
But I think one of the things that is really smart when you're doing this, and I think and this is what made me think of it when you mentioned again the magic, is the shorter the time frame, if you are going to pull it off, is often, when you were talking about friends to lovers, they have to know each other already.
Yeah. I mean, this is also, we talk about this all the time when you write a novella. Like
with novellas, yeah.
They got to know each other.
Yeah. So in this case, like, right, it turns out that like Harrison, of course, is like sort of been in love with her, and, she had another boyfriend and all this stuff, but like they see each other in a different way because everything goes wrong. Like her ex shows up, all this stuff, but it really is like one of those things where the storm is right. If it was just like the last night at this restaurant, that's one thing. But the fact that the storm is what kind of traps them all is the part that really makes it, I think, work too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you can add some extra layer to like ramp up in this case, it literally kind of does feel like danger. At one point, like they're like bailing water out of the restaurant. You know what I mean? This week's episode of Fated Mates is brought to you by TJ Alexander, author of A Gentleman's Gentleman.
Jen, like all great historical heroes, Lord Christopher Eden has a problem. And that is that he lives...
I'm like, it's always like his father. Am I right?
It is romance law, but we're going to get there.
Okay.
Here's the thing. Christopher lives in the middle of nowhere, like in the backwoods of backwoods, no interest in society, out there, far from the prying eyes of the tall. And if he had his way, he would just spend his whole life like hanging out with his cook and his butler, and that would be that. Problem is romance law. And his late father's will has come to pass, and he has been told that he has to find a wife by the end of the season if he intends to keep the family fortune. My absolute favorite plot. Problem is, Jen, Christopher is not attracted to women, and so he's keenly aware of the fact that like he can find a wife, but he's not going to be able to keep her happy. So, nevertheless, there is an inheritance on the line, and so off to London we go. Enter James Harding, Christopher's new, distractingly handsome rigidly traditional ballad.
Oh, I love it already.
I'm dead of excitement. After a rocky start between them, these two strike up a fragile friendship. And what ends up happening is, despite the fact that Christopher's on the hunt for a wife, they are super duper attracted to each other. And this one is going to be dry and bantery and a slow burn, delicious romance. If you've ever read a TJ Alexander book, you know that they deliver. This one has a gorgeous, nuanced portrait of trans identity and big secrets that both of these characters are keeping that are going to end in a delicious explosion of romance.
I love it already.
And if you're in New York or around New York for Trans Day of Visibility, which is March 31st, I will be moderating a conversation between TJ and Joanna Lowell, who wrote A Sure Thing last year about transness and romance and why it's great.
And where is that happening, Sarah?
That is at the Astoria Bookshop in Queens. And again, we'll put links in show notes, but you can join us if you're nearby. It's going to be a great conversation.
Perfect. So this A Gentleman's Gentleman is available in print, ebook, and audio. And if you click on the chapter title right now, you can be taken to buy the book. Thanks to TJ Alexander for sponsoring this week's episode.
When you start to actually think about how these books, the best ones, work, you can't discount the fact that mapping one of these tropes with others just like amps up the ticking clock, right? So like forced proximity and road trips go so well together. Like I'm on the record for believing that like Joanna Shupe's Tycoon is one of the greatest novellas ever written, and it's a road trip on a train. And the heroine's a perfume girl who's like witnessed a murder, and she goes running from a New York City department store to Penn Station and gets herself on a train that is owned in the private rail car of the president of the Bank of Manhattan, right? And then they are like headed to St. Louis together, stuck in this car together. And so you sort of know there's like the ticking clock of the bad guys coming after them. There's the ticking clock of the train ride for them falling in love. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's like the forced proximity of it all. And so I think once you are aware of ticking clock as a concept, you will start to see it everywhere, because it is a really solid way of just like tightening closing all the walls in.
Right. Well, and I think I've been thinking a lot about what you said. As we've been talking about how effective it is in historicals, but I think one of the reasons I really found myself thinking of them in contemporaries is because people seem to have a really hard time building conflict in a contemporary. Mm-hmm. And this is a way that you can do it, right? So I just recently talked about and really loved Into the Woods by Jenny Holiday. And the ticking clock that I thought was... So they're at this camp together. And the thing that's really smart that she does is like the camp has like 2 sessions, right? Like it's like 3 weeks and then there's like a break and then there's another 3-week session. And in this book, she is only going to be doing their teaching at session 1 while he has committed to both. And so the thing that's like really smart here is she's going to leave camp in a couple weeks and he will have to go back. And so you find yourself really thinking like, well, how much time, right? Like they have to make the most of the time in the first session. And then there is going to have to be a break that happens. But because it's just a couple of weeks, right? Like not a whole year or whatever, I thought it was really effective for thinking like their dread about that happening, right? And she can't stay. She has to go. She has like big things happening at her business, right? And so she cannot just be like, okay, well, we're having a great time banging all over this camp. Like I have to stay, right? And so there's a good, and he is like, really struggling with like finding himself or whatever. And he's like, not going to leave the camp. So I thought I really found myself thinking like, that's a good example of it's a different clock for both of them, right? And that is creating some tension where we know that this has to come to an end. right?
Yeah. I mean, I think your point about it's very difficult to make the clock 80% of the book, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is very true. And so, my suggestion to writers is don't worry about like making it 80% of the book. Sometimes you deploy it in the midway, like I said. But I did say the category does this well, and I just want to name check another Storm book that I think is like a very listen. Weather is a great way to do this.
Weather, yes.
Snowed-in. There's a reason why we love a snowed-in romance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I want to talk about Jules Bennett's One Stormy Night, which is a desire, that I downloaded like yesterday, and I just tore through. Okay,
I love that.
So the heroine is a plus-size model, and she has been hired. Listen, this is romance business. She has been hired to do a photo shoot for a magazine that's owned by like a billionaire.
Sure.
And
of course.
Where is this photo shoot, Jen? His house. The billionaire's house.
Of course.
And there's a rainstorm, and like it's like the bridge to the house gets washed out in this rainstorm. I mean, this is like the gothicest, the most gothic contemporary you can come up with. Listen, Harlequin, no notes. And like basically they're like stuck in this house until somebody can fix the bridge and get them out of there. Listen, like it's great. She is, and so it's just the two of them sort of rattling around in this big old mansion house. And like she's like so committed. Like she needs to get this photo shoot. She needs to be like, she needs to land this deal so that she can have like the future that she has dreamed of, right? Like this is a woman who has a very clear future for herself. But it's like it's great because like she's always wearing makeup. Like she refuses to let it. Like she's like, I am gonna look like the most beautiful model there is, like all the time. And he's like, you realize we're just like in my house, I'm just hanging around, and It's great. And they fall for each other, and they are just like, and he is like, he's basically like, I'm sort of your boss, so like I don't think I can. And she's like, okay, well, I'm sort of your employee, so I don't think we should. And it's the will they, won't they, but it's this sort of stress of once the bridge gets fixed, she goes back to being just like a girl who's trying to be a plus size model. Right. And he goes back to being romance billionaire. So like, how will they ever survive back in the world? And listen, everybody who listens to the podcast knows that I love like billionaire normie, celebrity normie. Like I love that structure because I think there is a very real sense of like, your life is so drastically different than my life. I won't fit into it. So, this kind of like clock helps, move everything forward along with the like, now you're forced to be in this house together in the storm and by yourselves. The other thing is we haven't talked about is threat of discovery.
Yes.
Which I think is,
this is like the fake dating, like you sort of said.
Yeah, but I don't mean fake dating. I mean, like, literally there's some shit going down. And like, so the immediate book that I thought of was Sophie Jordan's Sins of a Wicked Duke, which remains, listen, I love Sophie's books really a whole lot, but this remains my favorite in a lot of ways. The heroine of this book is like, undercover as a footman in this duke's house trying to like find some shit.
Sure.
It's really shenanigans, but she has like gotten a job as a footman, so listen, if you like disguised in trousers, heroine disguised in trousers, like this book is for you. And there's this sense that like there is no way this girl is gonna not get found out. And And that's a great, like, this is an old school trope. You don't see it very much anymore for all the reasons that you don't see it very much anymore, but it still hits if that's where you came through. And like that sense of like the ticking clock is actually in the reader's head. Yeah. Is a really interesting way that it works also. Like the characters themselves have no knowledge of the ticking clock.
Yeah, that is something I did want to talk about,
Yeah.
right? Like, do
We
they
know.
have to know, right? Yeah, I think we have to know.
And I think when we think to ourselves, oh no, what happens when they find out? Right? So it's, you know, he took this sort of it's an offshoot of Ticking Clock, because it's, you know, what's going to happen when he finds out that, like, when she finds out that he is only dating her on a dare, or like for money. Right. Like, what's going to happen when he finds out she's not actually a man? She's a woman in disguise as a footman, right? What's going to happen when in Beverly Jenkins's To Catch a Raven, like, you know, they're caught trying to steal the Declaration of Independence? Like, there are these sort of moments where in your head, you're like, oh no, it's going to happen.
Right. But it's not about time. It's about discovery.
Right. Threat of discovery.
Okay. That's actually, maybe I'll just ask that as a question to you. What's the IAD book that has the biggest ticking clock to you?
Well, there's the one where they're on the Amazon going to get Dorada's ring, right?
Well, I was going to say, or Lothair, right? Because
Dorada just coming.
Dorada, ring. But I was like, yeah, because in Lothair, once he finds the ring and makes the wish, Ellie will be gone. Right?
Yeah.
He will turn her.
And that does have that scene that I talked about where it's like they're going to die, right? Like, she's like, don't send me away.
Yes. Right. And it is literally life and death for her. And the plot of the book is her convincing him that, like, he can't use the ring that way when he finds it.
Right.
Right?
Because it's interesting. I mean, this goes back to what I said about paranormal, right? Like, Cressley, in the, like, amazing race movement of IAD, like, that's obviously ticking clock because, like,
yes, right,
one of you is going to win, right?
Right.
But and that works. But no, she ultimately levels up and levels up and levels up.
Yeah.
To... And arguably the entire series is on the ticking clock of the accession, right? Like, what's going to happen? But who knows?
But does it ever really happen?
No.
Exactly, right? Are they even in it yet? I don't even know.
Right. So, I mean, I think, well, as you know, I think you and I feel we differ slightly. That Gareth and Lucia book for me is like one of my top tier IAD books, and in part because I really love a road trip. You know, also for those of you who are, again, I always say, like, this is what happens to me in my conflict workshop too, where I'm like, I'm going to talk about books that, like, don't have heavy conflict too, so that you can see that. And then it's like, really, but the easiest examples are the ones that are, but there are two that I think are really, two things. I think Christina Lauren does a great job deploying ticking clocks in a lot of their books, but I would say Something Wilder, which is also a road trip romance, is a good example of a ticking clock that is not life or death. Like, the book, to Jen's point, runs 90% is the actual clock ticking.
Yes.
And, like, things happen over the course of the book, but ultimately the romance itself is like a much quieter. There is no sort of threat that they won't. Yeah. By the end, there is no, like, this is one of those. This is also a book I talk about. Like, there's no third act breakup in this book. In this book, it's just like the two of them. They're tested. It's just sort of a sense of like, well, who will we be when this is all over?
Right.
Together. Right. But I want to talk about Kate's Luck of the Draw.
Yeah.
Which is Fake Relationship. And, like, the Fake Relationship book I hold up as, like, one of the best.
It's perfect. Yeah.
But also, that's a ticking clock because he's going to, the reason why the fake relationship exists is because the hero is attempting to inherit, like, basically he wants to be allowed to purchase this camp, right? This, like, and he has a plan for this summer camp. And so they have to fake it until the decision is made. And then, of course, like, once the decision is made, these are two people who fucking hate each other at the beginning. Well, he hates her at the beginning of the book.
Right.
And so that structure really works really well. That's a good example of your point. And again, like, what Kate Claiborne can do is not the same as what the rest of us can do. But in that book, it is a longer period of time. And like they end up like, it's like over the course of 8 weekends or 10, like there's, so it's a really interesting structure.
The thing about that book, the thing that is amazing to me about that book is like, you forget that somebody might figure it out. And then when they do, it's like so fucking devastating, right?
Yeah.
Here's what I want to talk about. And I wanted to talk about it with Whiteout, which we started with. But I also think that Kate does this well with the other side of disappearing, which is when you have characters on a ticking clock. Yeah, right? When you have characters on a ticking clock, how do you give them a break? If that's required for like story, like romance reasons, literally, right?
Yeah, and you can't just be going at a 10 the whole time.
Right.
You have to break book.
And in Whiteout, I like joked about it as I was reading, and I'm sure every other time I've talked about it, which is like, when are they going to bang? Like, right? Like, when are they going to bang?
Right. They're literally dying out here.
Yeah. Right. Like, how is this a romance if there isn't like, now, not because of sex, but just like them falling in love?
And listen, Adriana Anders knows the job, everybody.
Oh, yeah. Right. And so what happens is they've come across essentially, like, he remembers that there's like a shack that they can like take a break at, right?
A
like,
groundskeeper
literally.
shack.
Only in Antarctica. How convenient. But in the other side of disappearing, they are on the road and they go to his family's home in like Missouri or something, the family's farm.
Mm-hmm.
And there they have a couple of nights where they are kind of off of the ticking clock of like, we're going to find my mother. We're like following these clues. We just need to take this break. And I remember thinking at the time, like, this is really smart because, and I think this is like my point, or I don't know if I actually made it, but I was trying to make earlier, which is the clock needs to be ticking, but the author still has to be in charge of the story. And so there are times that for like, to show us the development of the relationship of these two people, or more, I guess, right? Like if it's like a poly romance or whatever, right? Like you have to show these people having an opportunity to really like connect with each other outside of whatever it is that is like pushing them along. And I think that like sometimes it's not, like sometimes they're just on the road trip and they can find that time. But like in the case of Whiteout and the other side of disappearing, it felt like sort of a pool opened up and they had to like kind of drift off into like on a lazy river, right? Like they're on the river, but like they have to like get stuck for a while together somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like romantic suspense does this really well too, right? Like it cannot just, it can't feel like the case or whatever that Urge to Survive is like bigger than the romance. Then it's just a thriller.
Mm-hmm.
So if the clock is really ticking, you still have to find ways. If they can't connect, then you have to build it in. And I think in both of those books, there's sort of a way in which you get them off and with each other and you're like, oh, okay.
Take a breath. Let them be. Mm-hmm.
Right before they are back on it.
Yeah. I mean, that is why the road gets washed out in historicals.
Correct.
Right? Like,
right.
There's a...
Yes.
I mean...
You have to
not
slow
to put
it down
too fine a point
too.
on it, everybody, but like there are moments where you have to give them a break.
Yeah.
Especially when you're writing an adventure.
Yeah. Right.
And I mean, Kate, obviously that's for everybody, but yeah, to your point, I'm thinking about my own books and like often there is a moment where you're like, we have been moving for 10 chapters.
And I think that is like, to me, one of those things where it's the only way I can think to describe it, and maybe it's not the greatest choice, but like is like, you know, after a scene, when you're at the theater watching Shakespeare, after some shit goes down, like people are going to come on stage and then make you laugh, right? Like, so the way that like tension stays tense is you like give people a break from it and then you put them right back on, right?
It's scene and sequel, right? Which we've probably talked about, but Dwight Swain a million trillion years ago in the 60s wrote a book called Scene and Sequel. And no, I don't know if that's what it's called, but that's the concept that is introduced in it. And basically, anybody who reads third person, who cut their teeth on third person romances, right? Dual POV romances, knows the structure intuitively, which means something happens, right? An external thing happens. And then the scene switches. So that's what he refers to as scene, right? Active work in the book. And then the scene switches to what he refers to as sequel, which is a character then responding to it internally, right? So in romance, we see this all the time because we see like something happen actively to the heroine, and then the scene switches and we see the hero or the second protagonist respond mentally to it. And then, the structure then, so that sequel scene, for lack of sequel, small s scene, is the beat. It's the place where you take a breath.
The last book I thought was thinking about that I wanted to talk about on my list was Dionysus in Wisconsin, which everybody knows I loved, right? And like Dionysus is going to come and take over Sam's body. And Ulysses has to save him. And that's going to require like levels of magic and, all sorts of things happening. And one of the things that I thought was really clever about this book, as I was thinking about it is one of the ways that Ulysses can like read that Dionysus is getting closer is by the way people respond to Sam. Right? So it's like literally a bacchanal, right? Like they go into a bar and Sam goes out on the floor and like starts dancing. And then like all of a sudden Ulysses looks out and it's like people like streaming around him in a circle. And he's like, what just happened? And it's this sense of like, and Sam, like not even really knowing or realizing that the way people responding to him is more intense as like Dionysus gets closer. I also think, like thinking back about it a lot, I think it's hilarious. I think one of the things I really loved about this book, and I really love that book, is the idea that like Dionysus is somebody I have to be scared of, right? Like it's not Zeus, right, in Wisconsin. And I thought that is like the other thing is like another hallmark maybe of a good ticking clock is that the clock starts ticking and they don't feel the weight of it immediately, right? Or it doesn't seem as scary in some way, or as intense, right? And then it's kind of that scrambling, like, oh shit, we gotta take care of
this.
Right,
we have plenty of time.
Yes.
And then suddenly you don't have plenty of time.
You don't have plenty of time.
A procrastinator's
a real dream
world
for someone like me.
So that's it, everybody, I think. Wait, did I talk about every book I wanted to talk about?
I talked about every book on my list, and more.
Me too. I added some in as we were going. This was fun.
I thought so.
A gift to those of you who have asked us to talk more about craft. Now everybody else is like, okay, but can we get back to in the immortal words of Hamilton, can we get back to politics?
Nobody wants that, Sarah. I, however, am very excited about upcoming episodes we have planned, so don't worry, everybody.
Yeah, we're excited. There are some great upcoming episodes. We also have a read-along coming.
Yes.
Which is Julianne Long's What I Did for a Duke. You're going to have a great time reading it. It is a banger of a historical. I'm Sarah McLean. I'm here with my friend Jen Prokop. We are Fated Mates. If you really love listening to us talk about romance novels and wish that you had other people to talk about romance novels with, you should join our Patreon at fatedmates.net/Patreon. When you join it, you get a special episode of Fated Mates every month just dedicated to our Patreon subscribers. And you get access to the Fated Mates Discord, which is full of romance lovers and other magnificent firebirds like you. If Patreon's not your thing, but you just want to spend some more time with us, You can head over to fatedmates.net and check on show notes, where there is a full list of every book we spoke about in this episode, as well as links to anything else that we happen to chat about. You can find us also on Blue Sky, on Threads, and on Instagram, where you can send us messages and tell us about books that you really love with a ticking clock, or other books you really love, or just say hi and tell us that you're thinking about us. We are here every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be here for as long as you'll have us. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.